There is a person living in your mind right now. You may not have spoken to them in weeks, months, maybe years. You may have told yourself you've moved on. You may have convinced yourself the feeling has faded, the grip has loosened, the chapter is closed. And then something small happens, a song, a particular quality of afternoon light, a stranger who walks a certain way. And suddenly that person is back, as vivid and present as if they were standing in the room with you. Not a faint memory, not a passing thought, a full presence, an ache, an aliveness in your chest that nothing about your actual circumstances can entirely explain. This is not a small thing, and it is not random. If you have ever found yourself unable to stop thinking about someone you loved and lost, someone you barely knew but couldn't forget, someone who hurt you and yet somehow remains, someone who disappeared before anything was ever fully resolved, then what you are experiencing has a structure. It has a cause, and that cause runs far deeper than the surface story you have been telling yourself about why this person matters. Carl Jung spent decades studying the moments when other people grip us more powerfully than logic can justify. He understood that when someone refuses to leave your mind, they are not simply occupying space. They are carrying something that belongs to you. That is the beginning of the answer, but it is only the beginning. To understand why certain people embed themselves so completely in your inner world, why some encounters feel like recognition rather than introduction, why some losses feel like they are peeling something from your very identity, why some people trigger a longing that seems to reach beyond them into something older and larger, you need to understand how the mind actually works. Not the part you can see, the part you cannot. Jung believed, with an intensity he built over a lifetime of careful observation, that the human mind is far larger than the portion we have access to. The conscious self, the part that thinks in sentences, that makes decisions, that speaks and chooses and plans, is only one layer. Beneath it, vastly larger, is the unconscious, a territory that is not silent and inert, but constantly active, constantly generating, constantly responding to the world in ways we don't directly experience as thought. We experience them instead as feelings that arrive without explanation, as attractions we can't account for, as a persistent pull toward people or situations that seems to operate independently of what we tell ourselves we want. The unconscious is not simply a pit of suppressed memories. It is better understood as a vast interior country, with its own logic, its own imagery, its own way of expressing what the conscious mind has not yet been able to face. And that interior country is in constant relationship with the outer world. Every person you meet is filtered through it. Most of the time, this filtering happens invisibly, but occasionally it becomes visible, intensely, unmistakably visible, in the form of someone who occupies your mind long after any reasonable explanation for their presence has run out. That is the moment Jung called projection. The word is used casually now in ways that strip it of its actual power. It gets invoked as an accusation, you're projecting, meaning someone is misreading a situation through their own fears. While that simplified version is not entirely wrong, it misses the deeper architecture of what Jung meant. For Jung, projection was not primarily about blame or distortion. It was about the specific way the unconscious makes itself known. When an inner content, an emotion, a quality, a possibility, a darkness, cannot be recognized or integrated consciously, the mind finds an outer carrier for it. It attaches that inner content to a real person in the external world. And from that moment forward, every time you think about that person, you are encountering the projected content as much as you are encountering the actual human being. This is why some people grip you with a force that seems disproportionate to the objective facts. This is why someone you met briefly can feel more significant than someone you have known for years. This is why a person who is by every rational measure gone from your life continues to hold a place in your mind that feels almost more real than the world around you. You are not thinking about them. You are thinking through them, using their image as a screen onto which something essential from your own depths is being projected and seen. The person living in your mind is not just that person. They are a messenger from the part of you that you have not yet fully met. This is where the explanation becomes personally important. Because if what Jung observed is correct, and the consistency of the pattern across a vast range of human experience suggests that it is, Then the question, why can't I stop thinking about this person, is actually asking something much larger. It is asking, what is it inside me that I have not yet recognized? What quality, what longing, what fear, what capacity have I been unable to look at directly? And what is it about this specific person that allowed that hidden content to finally, explosively find a surface? Projection does not happen randomly. The person who becomes a carrier for your projected material is never chosen arbitrarily. Something about them acts as what Jung described as a hook. They carry some actual quality, some real characteristic that provides just enough external reality for the projection to attach to. A gesture, an energy, a kind of intelligence or beauty or recklessness that is genuinely present in them. And that is also the precise quality you have been unable to claim in yourself. The outer reality provides the ledge, but what builds the castle above it is entirely internal. When you are in the grip of a powerful projection, the person feels extraordinarily real and specific. The feelings you have about them feel like feelings about them. The longing, the admiration, the resentment, the tenderness, all of it seems to be a direct response to their particular existence. It does not feel like anything interior is happening. It feels entirely exterior, like this specific individual has touched something in you that no one else ever has. That feeling is not entirely wrong. The hook is real. The person genuinely has some quality that triggered the projection, but the intensity, the way they refuse to leave your mind, the way the thought of them arrives uninvited and complete, the way no amount of reasoning dissolves the pull, that intensity is not coming from them. It is coming from the depth and urgency of what they are carrying for you. There are several forms this can take, and recognizing which one you are inside is the beginning of something genuinely transformative. The most commonly recognized form is the beloved who remains. You are in love with someone, or something close to love, something that felt essential, that made you feel more alive or more real or more like the version of yourself you had always wanted to be. The relationship ended or never fully began, or was interrupted before it could reach whatever it was building toward, and yet they remain. In your dreams, in the edges of your daily thoughts, in the particular quality of silence that falls over you at unexpected moments. The intense romantic projection, what Jung associated with the concept he called the anima in men and the animus in women, is not primarily about the other person. It is about the inner figure they are carrying. The anima is Jung's term for the interior feminine in a man's psychology, qualities, capacities, and emotional depths that the masculine ego has not fully claimed. When a man encounters a woman who hooks his anima, the experience is not simply attraction. It is recognition, the feeling that she embodies something he has always been reaching for, not just in terms of relationship, but in terms of self. The longing he feels for her is also a longing for the part of himself she is carrying, the part that is emotionally whole, creatively expressive, connected to feeling and the full depth of human experience. The same dynamic operates in the reverse with its own specific texture. The animus, the inner masculine in a woman's psychology, appears through those who carry qualities of strength, clarity, purposefulness, or creative force. A woman who finds herself unable to stop thinking about a particular person may be experiencing that grip because something in them is mirroring back a quality of agency or vitality that she has not yet been able to fully inhabit in herself. This goes against the romantic narrative we are trained to believe, the narrative in which love is about finding the right person, someone who completes us. Jung would say that the person who feels like the answer is often instead a question. Not the destination of the longing, but the arrow pointing toward what the longing is actually seeking, which is always, in the end, something that belongs to the interior rather than the exterior world. None of this makes the feelings less real. None of it makes the grief of losing such a person less genuine. But it does reframe the project. If the person in your mind is carrying something that belongs to you, the question becomes, what is it they are carrying? And what would it mean to begin slowly and carefully to take it back? But not every person who occupies your mind is someone you loved. Some of the people who live most powerfully in your mind are people who hurt you, people who betrayed, abandoned, humiliated, or dismissed you. And yet there they are, in your thoughts, in your dreams, in your internal monologue. You imagine conversations with them. You rehearse what you would say if you had the chance. Time passes, and the grip does not loosen the way you expected. This too is projection, but what is being projected belongs to a different region of the interior world. Jung called it the shadow. The shadow is the name Jung gave to the part of the personality we most strongly deny. Every person, in the course of developing a sense of self, decides, consciously and unconsciously, what they will allow themselves to be. The qualities that fit the chosen identity are cultivated. The qualities that don't fit, the anger, the selfishness, the envy, the ambition that feels dangerous, the weakness, the neediness, get pushed down. Not destroyed. Pushed down, where they continue to exist with full energy intact, but without conscious access. The shadow is not evil in any simple moral sense. Much of what ends up there is simply the disowned. Qualities that might actually be valuable: assertiveness, sensuality, creative wildness, the capacity to say no, but that were learned to be too much, too inappropriate, and so they were hidden. The shadow projects outward. When someone in the external world behaves in a way that triggers our own suppressed self, the reaction is often far more intense than the situation calls for. The fury you feel at someone's selfishness may partly be a fury at a selfishness you have never allowed yourself to express. The contempt you feel for someone's weakness may carry, buried within it, the contempt you have turned on your own vulnerability. The person who occupies your mind because of what they did to you is often carrying, in your projection, the qualities you most strongly refuse to see in yourself. This does not mean that what they did was acceptable or that the hurt was not real. What it does explain is why certain wrongs continue to live in your mind with a freshness that time does not diminish. The wound that won't close is often pointing at something, a question about what you are allowed to want or allowed to say or allowed to be. There is also a third category, quieter but no less significant. These are the people who live in your mind, not because you loved them deeply or because they hurt you profoundly, but because something about them arrested you in a way you have never fully accounted for. A teacher from long ago whose words keep returning. A stranger who caught your attention with unusual intensity. A public figure whose presence generates something in you that feels closer to recognition than admiration. Jung associated this kind of experience with what he called the self, the deeper organizing center of the psyche, distinct from the ego, that holds the potential of who you could become. When someone carries a projection of the self, their presence in your mind tends to feel less like longing and more like a pull toward a way of living, a quality of being, a kind of aliveness that you have not yet fully inhabited, but sense is available to you. This is the projection that artists feel toward other artists whose work opens something in them, that students feel toward teachers who see something in them before they can see it themselves. Their grip is not grief, it is invitation. Understanding which type of projection is active is practically important, because each type suggests a different direction for what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming more fully oneself, of bringing unconscious content into conscious living, not by suppressing it further, but by meeting it and integrating what it contains. Before any of that can begin, one thing must be clearly understood. From the inside, projection doesn't feel like projection. It never does. That is both the defining feature and the reason it is so difficult to work with. When you are in the middle of a powerful projection, you are not experiencing an interior dynamic. You are experiencing an exterior reality. The person feels vividly real and specific. You are not aware of gazing into a mirror. You are looking out of a window at someone who seems to actually have the power you have granted them. The whole mechanism depends on the outer figure feeling real enough to hold the projected content. If the projection were visible, it would dissolve immediately. The only reason it persists, the only reason someone continues to live in your mind with such intensity, is that the inner content they are carrying has not yet been recognized as belonging to you. The work, then, is not to stop feeling. It is not to talk yourself out of the reality of the experience. It is to gradually, carefully, courageously turn your attention from the outer figure to what they are carrying, to ask, not in a blaming or dismissive way, but with genuine curiosity. What is it about this specific person that grips me? What quality do they represent? What does the feeling in my chest when I think of them actually consist of? The answer does not arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, through honest reflection, through the willingness to sit with uncomfortable possibilities, through dreams, which Jung saw as the language of the unconscious, expressing the dynamic of a projection in symbolic form before the conscious mind can articulate it. Through the patterns you begin to notice, not just in this one person, but in the history of who has gripped you and what they shared, and what that consistency suggests about the recurring content of your projections. Because projections have patterns. The unconscious does not project randomly. It projects the same material repeatedly until it is recognized. Someone who falls repeatedly for unavailable people and finds them living in the mind long after they have moved on is not simply unlucky. They are encountering the same interior content again and again, finding it in different faces, experiencing the same rupture, because the projection is never completed. The unconscious goes on casting the same image onto whoever provides the nearest hook. This is one of the reasons why pursuing the projected figure, trying to reconnect, trying to resolve the longing through something external, rarely brings the satisfaction it promises, because the longing is not ultimately for that person, it is for what they are carrying. And what they are carrying does not live in them, it lives in you. The outer resolution cannot complete what is essentially an inner process. What distinguishes a living relationship from a projection-governed obsession is movement. In a living relationship, the projections gradually dissolve. The quality you initially fell in love with, that luminous, seemingly perfect embodiment of everything you were reaching for, becomes, over time, a person. Complex, specific, sometimes disappointing, sometimes surprising in entirely new ways. The longing doesn't disappear, but it matures, and something of what you projected onto them begins to find its way into your own life, into your own choices, your own creative work, your own capacity for aliveness. This is individuation expressing itself through relationship. But when the relationship that would allow this process is not available, when the person who gripped you is gone, or unreachable, or never fully there, the process must happen differently. This is where the concept Jung called active imagination becomes relevant. Active imagination is a method for entering into direct dialogue with unconscious content, rather than waiting for it to appear only in dreams. The principle is to allow a figure from the interior world to become vivid enough to interact with, not to direct or control the interaction, but to hold it consciously, to let the unconscious speak and to respond. This is not daydreaming, it requires a specific quality of attention. The image of the person who lives in your mind can serve as an entry point, not to think about them in the circular way that obsessive thinking moves, the replaying, the rehearsal, the self-examination that circles back on itself, but to sit with the image with a different quality of attention, to ask it what it needs, to notice what feeling arises and follow that feeling not as a clue about the other person, but as a signal from the interior. There is also the matter of timing. Projections do not attach themselves randomly. They require both the right hook in the outer person and the right moment in the interior life. There are periods when the unconscious is more active, when material that has been dormant begins to press more urgently toward consciousness. Major transitions often activate this dynamic, the end of a significant relationship or chapter, a loss that strips away something holding the psyche in a familiar shape, a creative or professional plateau that quietly signals the life as currently constructed cannot continue. Entering midlife, what Jung saw as the great moment of psychological reckoning when the structures built to achieve the first half of life begin to reveal their inadequacy for the second. Any experience that disrupts the surface routines enough to allow the interior country to make itself heard. In such moments, the unconscious often throws a figure. Someone appears, in reality, in imagination, in dream, who functions as a carrier for the interior material the transition is requiring the psyche to engage with. The grip that figure exerts is proportional to the urgency of the moment. The more the interior is pressing for recognition, the more powerfully the outer figure holds the projection. This is why certain encounters that happen at particular thresholds take on a quality of destiny, why the person you met during that specific period feels unlike anyone before or after. It is not necessarily that they were objectively different. It is that you were at a moment when the interior country was sending its most urgent emissaries, and they were the first person with the right hook to receive what was coming. Understanding this does not diminish the experience. It deepens it, because it reveals that the encounter was meaningful, a message not from the other person, but from the part of you that was ready or desperate to grow. The first sign that projection is beginning to dissolve is usually a subtle shift in how the person in your mind appears. The intensity of the grip becomes slightly more legible. You begin to notice, not as a logical deduction but as a felt sense, that they carry something for you, and that this something has a quality of your own you have not fully claimed. The feelings do not disappear, but they acquire a different texture. They become less about wanting something from the other person and more about understanding something about yourself. At the same time, the actual other person often comes into slightly clearer view. The idealized quality begins to soften, not into disappointment, but into something closer to genuine recognition. They become more human, more particular. The projection dissolving does not mean the feeling was false. It means it is being returned to its actual source. The qualities you found in them, the aliveness, the depth, the creative force, the courage, these were real. They were also, at least in part, yours, and the grief at this realization is meaningful. It is the grief of recognizing that what you were seeking has always been closer than the person you were seeking it in. One of the things Jung observed that is especially relevant here is the difference between falling in love and actually loving. Falling in love is almost always predominantly projection. The overwhelming feeling of completion, the sense that this person answers a longing nothing else has ever touched, is the signature of unconscious content landing on its carrier. But the falling cannot be sustained indefinitely. Projections by their nature begin to dissolve when the other person continues to reveal themselves as human and specific. What can follow, if both people are willing to remain present through the dissolution, is something richer and harder. The encounter with the actual person, distinct from the projected image, and alongside that, the encounter with the interior content the projection was carrying. This is where many relationships fracture. The falling was so beautiful that what follows, the gradual emergence of the real person, the dissolution of the projection, is experienced as loss, as evidence that the love was somehow wrong. People leave at this point and begin the cycle again with a new person who receives the same projection and generates the same overwhelming feeling of completion. And the cycle continues, leaving in its wake a series of encounters that were intense and then confusing and then somehow insufficient, while the interior material goes unrecognized and unintegrated. The person who lives in your mind then is an invitation, not to pursue them, though the feeling of wanting to is entirely understandable, not to forget them, though some part of you may have been told that forgetting is health, but to ask what they are carrying, to sit with the specific feeling their image generates and follow it carefully toward what it is actually saying. To notice what quality of life becomes imaginable in their presence, what kind of person you seem to become when you think of them, what previously inaccessible part of you seems to open. This is difficult to hold when the longing is acute. When the mind keeps returning to someone specific, it rarely feels like an inner calling. It feels like a missing, like an empty space that only one particular person could fill. And that feeling is not to be dismissed or argued with. It is the form the invitation takes. The language the unconscious uses is emotional. It speaks in longing and in grief, and in the specific gravity of a particular person's image. To hear it properly, you have to take the emotion seriously while simultaneously learning to translate it. To hear not just, "I want this person back," but "What is it about this person that I am wanting?" Dreams are often where the projection communicates most directly. If the person who lives in your mind also visits you in dreams, pay attention to what they do there, not to what it means about them, but to what quality they carry in the dream, what feeling the encounter generates. In Jungian dream analysis, every figure in a dream is an aspect of the dreamer. The beloved who appears is not the actual beloved. They are a figure carrying a quality the dreamer needs to encounter. The emotion you feel upon waking is evidence that the inner material they are carrying is charged with energy. The stronger that emotion, the more urgently the interior material is pressing toward recognition. The dream is not telling you to pursue that person. It is telling you how much energy is bound up in what they are carrying for you. That energy, once the projection is recognized, becomes available. Projection represents an enormous investment of psychic energy. All the time spent thinking about the person in your mind, the replaying, the imagining, the rehearsing, is real energy being directed outward rather than inward, held by an external figure rather than fueling your own life. The withdrawal of a projection, when it happens genuinely rather than through suppression, returns that energy. Not all at once and not without grief, but progressively, measurably, in the form of an increased aliveness in your own daily existence. There are 3 ways people most commonly respond to the experience of someone living persistently in their mind. The first is to pursue the outer resolution, to reach out, to reconnect, to make something happen externally. Sometimes this is exactly the right thing to do. But when the motivation is primarily to silence the inner insistence rather than to genuinely connect, the pursuit rarely delivers what it promises. The outer encounter cannot complete the inner work. The second response is suppression. You decide that thinking about this person is unhealthy, that the feeling is self-indulgent. You redirect your attention every time the thought arises. You throw yourself into enough busyness that the interior voice cannot find quiet enough to be heard. This works after a fashion. The person fades from the active surface of the mind, but they do not disappear from the interior. They go deeper, and the psychic energy bound up in the projection goes with them, unavailable not just for living but for genuine feeling. The suppression that was meant to restore freedom often produces instead a kind of emotional flatness, a numbness that eventually extends beyond the specific person and colors the whole of experience. The third response is the one Jung advocated, and it is the hardest. It is to stay with the experience and ask it what it means, to develop a reflective relationship with the unconscious, to take seriously the message rather than simply suffering the messenger. This requires time set aside for genuine inner attention, not the circular thinking that passes for reflection, but quiet, open, patient attention to what actually arises when you stop trying to manage it. Writing, not recording events, but active exploration on the page, following a thread of feeling wherever it leads without censoring the destination, sitting quietly with the image of the person and noticing what feelings arise when you are simply present with it rather than trying to resolve it. Working with a therapist who understands these dynamics and can help you navigate the interior territory. What all of these approaches share is a fundamental reorientation of attention, from outward to inward, from the other person to the self, from how do I get this person out of my mind to what is my mind showing me through this person. Somewhere in the course of pursuing the second question honestly, the first tends to answer itself. Not through effort or discipline alone, but through a genuine meeting with the interior material the projection has been carrying. When that meeting happens, when a quality that has been projected outward is finally recognized and begun to be integrated into the living self, the grip of the outer figure shifts. It doesn't necessarily vanish. The person may remain a significant figure in memory and dreams, but the quality of their presence changes, from haunting to informing, from a wound to a direction. There are people who feel resistance when they first encounter this framework, a sense that to understand the psychological mechanism is somehow to diminish the experience, that if the longing is explained by projection, then what felt like love or grief or profound recognition was less real than it seemed. This is a misreading worth addressing directly. The projection mechanism does not invalidate the experience, it deepens it. The fact that someone carries projected interior content does not mean the feeling was illusory or that the person was irrelevant. The hook was real. The actual quality in the other person that triggered the projection was genuinely there, and the intensity of what you felt was real energy, real psychic energy, charged with real importance, pointing towards something genuinely significant. The projection simply locates the source of that significance more precisely. It is not the other person who is the source. It is you, the interior country that needs to grow, the qualities that have been waiting to be inhabited, the parts of the self that are now pressing with new urgency toward the life. The grief that accompanies this recognition is meaningful, arguably one of the most important forms available to a person. The grief of seeing through an illusion, not because the illusion was worthless, but because the reality beneath it is more demanding and more true. The projection was beautiful, in the way all projections are beautiful. It offered completeness, resolution, the sense of having found what was missing. The reality it points toward is less complete and more alive. What Jung gave us was a map of this territory. Not a simple map, not a reassuring one. A map that takes seriously the reality of the interior world and the genuine difficulty of navigating it. A map that gives the person who cannot stop thinking about someone a more useful set of questions than, why can't I get over this? Those better questions are, what is the actual nature of what I am feeling? What quality does this person represent? Where does that quality live in me? And why has it been placed outside rather than inhabited from within? What would it mean to begin to take it back? What would change in my daily life if I began to let that quality express itself through my own choices rather than seeking it in another person? These questions do not produce quick answers. They are questions that accompany a process, but the process, once begun, has its own momentum. Each small recognition, each moment in which a projected quality is recognized as one's own, makes the next recognition slightly easier. Each step toward the interior reduces the grip of the outer figure by a small but real degree. The person in your mind does not disappear all at once, but their quality changes, from haunting to instructive, from a gap in the self to a direction. The experience of someone living in your mind is not a sign of weakness. It is not evidence of an inability to move on or a failure of will. It is evidence of an active and urgent interior life, of an unconscious pressing through the available means towards something it needs to integrate. The feeling is uncomfortable, yes. The longing can be painful, the grief real, the recurring thoughts disruptive. But the experience is not the problem. It is the signal. And somewhere in the course of listening honestly, truly listening with patience and without urgency to resolve what has arisen, a shift begins. Not all at once, and not dramatically, but a shift that is real and cumulative and, in time, unmistakable. The thought of the person arrives, and it still carries feeling, but the feeling has changed its texture. It is no longer only a missing, it is also a knowing, a recognition of what that person helped you see, a sense, however incomplete and still forming, of what you are doing with what they revealed. That is the beginning of integration. And integration is what the whole long experience has been moving toward from the start. Not the resolution of the external situation, not the return of the person or the final confrontation or the perfectly worded message that closes the chapter, but the return of what they were carrying. The slow, imperfect, genuinely meaningful work of bringing home the parts of yourself that were once only visible through another person's face. The person in your mind is a messenger. The message is yours. And now, having understood a little more of what it contains, you can begin to do something that no amount of thinking about them could have accomplished. You can begin to listen to yourself. That is where this ends, and where something else begins.